My name is Margaret Chen, and I'm 73 years old. For 42 years, I scrubbed floors that weren't mine, polished silverware I'd never use, and pressed clothes for people who barely looked at me when I walked into their homes. 42 years. Every single day I saved. I planned. I dreamed of something that seemed impossible for someone like me, a place of my own, a piece of earth where I could finally rest. When I was 68, I bought it. 6 acres of land on the outskirts of Portland, Oregon, with a small cottage painted cream and yellow, surrounded by oak trees and wild roses. The deed had my name on it, Margaret Louise Chen, owner. I held that paper in my trembling hands and cried like I hadn't cried since I was a child. This was mine. Every inch of soil, every creaking floorboard, every window that caught the morning light. I had paid for it with decades of my life, but my son, Thomas, and his wife, Rebecca, never saw it that way. From the very first weekend after I moved in, they treated my cottage like it was a family vacation house. They showed up unannounced, brought friends I'd never met, threw parties that lasted until 2 in the morning, and left me to clean up the mess. I was the invisible hostess, the unpaid staff, and I said nothing because I thought that's what mothers do. We give. We forgive. We smile even when our hearts are breaking. That was my mistake, and it almost cost me everything. It was a Thursday morning in late September. The air smelled like rain and earth, and I was in my garden pulling weeds from around the tomatoes when my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but I answered anyway. "Hello, is this Margaret Chen?" A woman's voice, professional and friendly. "Yes, this is Margaret." "Wonderful. My name is Sienna, and I'm calling from Cascade Catering. We're confirming the menu for the October 7th event at your property. We have you down for a seated dinner for 180 guests. Is that correct?" I froze. My hand still clutched a fistful of weeds. "I'm sorry, what event?" There was a pause. "The wedding. Thomas Chen and Rebecca Lawson. Your address is listed as the ceremony and reception location." My legs gave out. I sat down hard on the dirt path, my heart hammering so loud I thought I might faint right there among my tomato plants. There must be some mistake. "No mistake, ma'am. We have the signed contract right here. October 7th. Your property. 180 confirmed guests." I hung up without saying goodbye. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. I sat there in the dirt, staring at my cottage, at the garden I'd planted with my own hands, at the little porch where I drank my tea every morning. And I realized with a sick, hollow feeling that my own son had planned his entire wedding on my land without asking me, without even telling me. The calls kept coming all week. The florist, the DJ, the photographer, the rental company for tables and chairs. Everyone had the same information. My address, my property, my home turned into a wedding venue without my knowledge or consent. I should tell you something about myself. I'm not the kind of woman who makes scenes. I spent 4 decades bowing my head, saying yes, ma'am, and no, sir, swallowing my pride every single day. But that day, sitting in my garden with dirt under my nails and rage burning in my chest, something inside me snapped. I called Thomas that evening. My voice was steady, but my hands were not. "Thomas, I need to talk to you about your wedding." "Mom, I'm in the middle of something. Can this wait?" "No, it cannot wait. The caterer called me today, and the florist, and about 6 other vendors. They all seem to think your wedding is happening here." Silence. Long, guilty silence. "Oh, yeah, I meant to mention that." "You meant to mention it?" "Look, Mom, it's not a big deal. We're paying for everything. We just need you to have the place ready. Maybe make some food for the family afterward. You know, like you always do. Like I always do. As if I were the hired help. As if this were a restaurant and not my home. Thomas, You sent out invitations to 180 people without asking me. Mom, don't be dramatic. It's probably more like 150, and honestly, you should be happy. It's your son's wedding. This is a big deal for us. What if I have other plans? He actually laughed. What plans, Mom? You're retired. You have all the time in the world. Besides, this is family. Family helps each other. I hung up. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't yell. I just ended the call and sat in my kitchen staring at the walls I had painted myself and let the tears come. But they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of rage. Pure, clean, clarifying rage. And that's when I got the idea. This is Revenge Stories with Michelle, a home for quiet courage and true endings. If you feel my words, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Your voice matters here. Your story matters too. The next morning, I called Prestige Events Northwest. They were the most expensive event planning company in Portland, the kind of company that handled corporate retreats and political fundraisers. Good morning, Prestige Events. How may I assist you? Good morning. My name is Margaret Chen, and I'd like to inquire about renting my property for a private corporate function on October 7th. The woman on the other end, her name was Caroline, sounded intrigued. That's quite short notice, Mrs. Chen. We typically require at least 8 weeks for corporate events. I understand, but I'm willing to pay a premium for the urgency. I have 6 acres of private land with a vintage cottage, mature gardens, and parking for 75 vehicles. It's extremely secluded, perfect for an executive retreat. Her tone shifted immediately. Money does that. Could you tell me more about the property? It's on the outskirts of Portland. Oak trees, rose gardens, a creek running through the back of the land. The cottage itself is historic, built in 1923. Completely renovated. I've had photographers here who've called it the most beautiful private property in the county. That last part was true. A local magazine had featured my cottage in their spring issue. I'd been so proud. Mrs. Chen, this sounds extraordinary. Could we schedule a site visit? Of course. How about this afternoon? Caroline arrived at 2 o'clock with her assistant, a young man named James, who carried a tablet and took notes on everything. I watched their faces as they walked through my garden. Caroline actually stopped in the middle of the path and turned in a slow circle. Mrs. Chen, this is stunning. Absolutely stunning. Thank you. I worked for 42 years to buy this place. She looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw something like respect in her eyes. You should be very proud. I am. We sat on my porch, and I served them tea while we discussed details. Caroline explained that a tech company was looking for a venue for an executive strategy meeting. High level, private. They needed absolute discretion. How much would you charge for a full-day rental? She asked. I didn't hesitate. $8,000. James looked up from his tablet, surprised. Caroline didn't blink. That's very reasonable for a property of this caliber. We'll take it. We signed the contract that afternoon. $8,000 for October 7th, from noon until 8 in the evening. Payment in full, up front, non-refundable. After they left, I sat on my porch with the contract in my lap and laughed. I laughed until my sides hurt, until tears ran down my face, until I felt lighter than I had in 5 years. I didn't call Thomas. I didn't call Rebecca, I simply waited. On Friday, 3 days before the wedding, my phone exploded. Rebecca called first, her voice shrill with panic. Margaret, what the hell is going on? The caterer says they can't access the property because there's another event booked. They're saying something about a corporate retreat. Oh, that. Yes, I rented the cottage for a business event. You what? I rented my property. A tech company offered me $8,000. I couldn't turn that down. The silence on the other end was so complete, I thought she'd hung up. Then she started screaming, "Margaret, our wedding is in 3 days. We have 180 people coming. We sent out invitations months ago." Yes, I heard about those invitations. Thomas forgot to mention them to me. This is insane. You're insane. How could you do this to your own son? I didn't do anything to my son, Rebecca. I simply rented my property, which belongs to me, to someone who actually asked permission. She hung up. 2 minutes later, Thomas called. "Mom, we need to talk, right now. I'm listening." "You need to cancel that corporate thing. Today. Call them and tell them there was a mistake." "There was no mistake, Thomas." I signed a legal contract. "I don't care about the contract. This is my wedding, and this is my property, which you used without asking me, without even telling me." His voice rose to a shout. "You're being ridiculous. This is family. You're supposed to support me." "Support works both ways, Thomas. You've been using my cottage like a hotel for 5 years. You've never once asked if it was okay. You've never offered to help with expenses. You just show up, make a mess, and leave. So this is what? Revenge? You're going to ruin my wedding because you're bitter?" That word, bitter. As if my feelings didn't matter. As if 42 years of sacrifice meant nothing. "I'm not ruining anything, Thomas. I'm protecting what's mine. You should have asked me before you planned an entire wedding on someone else's property." "We'll pay you," he shouted. "How much do you want?" 10,000, 15? This isn't about money. Then what is it about? Respect. I hung up. That evening, I made myself a cup of chamomile tea and sat on my porch watching the sunset. The oak trees turned gold in the fading light. My roses swayed in the breeze, and for the first time in 5 years, I felt like the true owner of this place. Not just legally, but in every way that mattered. But the real confrontation was still to come. Saturday morning, October 7th, I woke up at dawn. I put on my best dress, a deep blue linen that I'd bought for my 65th birthday, but never had occasion to wear. I did my hair. I even put on lipstick. If this was going to be a showdown, I was going to look like someone who knew exactly what she was doing. At 10 o'clock, the Prestige Events team arrived. Caroline came with a crew of 12 people. They moved through my property like a choreographed dance, setting up elegant white tents, arranging tables with crisp linens, placing sophisticated flower arrangements that must have cost a fortune. "Mrs. Chen," Caroline said, finding me on the porch, "I want to thank you again for this opportunity. Our clients are already raving about the location. I'm glad it's working out. If you're open to it, we'd love to discuss a longer-term partnership. We have clients who would pay very well for exclusive access to a property like this. A longer-term partnership, regular income, financial security beyond anything I'd ever imagined." "I'd like that very much," I said. At 11:30, the wedding guests started arriving. I watched from my kitchen window as car after car pulled up to my driveway, only to find the entrance blocked by Prestige Events signs that read, "Private Corporate Function, No Public Access." Families in formal wear got out of their vehicles, confused and upset. A woman in a lavender dress argued with one of the security guards Caroline had hired. A man in a gray suit made angry phone calls while his children ran around in the driveway. Part of me felt terrible. These people were innocent. They'd traveled here, bought gifts, taken time off work, all to celebrate a wedding that wasn't going to happen. But another part of me, the part that had been ignored and disrespected for 5 years, felt nothing but grim satisfaction. At noon exactly, Thomas's car came speeding up the driveway. He was wearing his tuxedo. Rebecca was in the passenger seat, and even from a distance, I could see she was crying. They jumped out of the car and ran toward the house. I met them on the porch. "Mom!" Thomas's face was red, his eyes wild. "Mom, you have to stop this." There are people everywhere. The church says they can't accommodate us at the last minute. Rebecca's family flew in from Boston. We have a photographer, a videographer, a string quartet. You should have thought about all of that before you used my property without permission. Rebecca pushed past Thomas, her white dress already dirty at the hem from running. Margaret, please, I'm begging you, we'll do anything. We'll pay you monthly rent. We'll never come here without asking again. Just please, please cancel this corporate thing and let us have our wedding. For just a moment, I wavered. Rebecca's tears looked real. Thomas's desperation was palpable. They were my family, my only son. But then I remembered something Thomas had said on the phone. What plans, Mom? You're retired. You have all the time in the world, as if my life had no value, as if I existed only to serve them. I can't cancel, I said. I signed a contract. These people paid me $8,000. We'll pay you 16, Thomas shouted. 20. Name your price. It's not about the price, Thomas. It's about respect. You treated my home like it was yours. You made decisions about my property without even consulting me. And when I found out, you acted like I was being unreasonable for being upset. A black Mercedes pulled up behind Thomas's car. Caroline stepped out, elegant in a gray pantsuit, and walked over to us. Is everything all right, Mrs. Chen? Everything's fine, Caroline. These are my son and his fiancée. There was a misunderstanding about today's date. Caroline's expression remained professionally neutral, but I could see she understood the situation perfectly. I see. Well, our event is scheduled until 8 this evening. If you need anything, I'll be coordinating inside. She walked away, leaving us in an uncomfortable silence. Rebecca was crying harder now. You're destroying the most important day of our lives. No, I said quietly. You destroyed it yourself when you didn't think I was worth asking. Thomas stared at me like I was a stranger. I don't even know who you are anymore. I'm Margaret Chen. I'm the woman who bought this property. I'm the owner. I'm someone who deserves to be treated with respect, even by her own son. They stood there for a long moment, not knowing what to do. Behind them, more wedding guests were arriving, only to be turned away by security. The chaos was growing. Finally, Rebecca grabbed Thomas's arm. We need to call everyone. We need to tell them the wedding is canceled. Postponed, I corrected. Not canceled. You can still get married, Thomas. Just not here. Not today. Not without asking me first. They left without another word. I watched them drive away, and I felt something I hadn't felt in decades. Power. Not the cruel kind, but the kind that comes from finally standing up for yourself. The corporate event was beautiful. 50 executives in expensive suits mingling in my garden, toasting with champagne, conducting their meetings under my oak trees. Caroline made sure I was treated like a distinguished partner, not a vendor. She introduced me to several clients who expressed interest in booking my property for future events. By the time they left at 8, I had 3 more bookings lined up and a monthly retainer offer from a law firm that wanted exclusive access for client retreats. But the day wasn't over yet. At 9, after the prestige events team had cleaned up and left, Thomas came back. Alone this time. He wasn't wearing his tuxedo anymore. Just jeans and a t-shirt. He looked exhausted. "Can I come in?" he asked. I stepped aside, and he walked into my cottage. He stood in the living room, looking around like he was seeing it for the first time. "I never really looked at this place," he said. "Not really. I always just thought of it as, I don't know, the family house, I guess." "It's not the family house, Thomas. It's my house. I know that now." He sat down heavily on my couch. "Rebecca is furious with me. Her parents are furious. Everyone is furious. They all want to know how I could let this happen." "And what did you tell them?" "The truth. That I planned a wedding on my mother's property without asking her permission. That I took her for granted. That I treated her like she was, less important than she is." He looked up at me, and I saw something in his eyes I hadn't seen in years. Genuine remorse. "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm really, truly sorry. Not just because the wedding got canceled, but because I've been a terrible son. You worked your whole life for this place, and I just took it. Like it was mine. Like you were still the woman who cleaned other people's houses instead of the woman who finally owned her own." I sat down across from him. "Do you understand why I did this?" "I think so. You needed us to see you, really see you. Not as someone who just exists to help us, but as a person with her own life, her own boundaries, her own property that she has every right to protect." "Yes, I get it now. I really do." He rubbed his face with both hands. "We're going to reschedule. Probably for next spring, and this time I'm going to ask you first. Actually ask you, not just inform you, and if you say no, we'll find somewhere else." "I wouldn't say no, Thomas." "Not if you asked me properly. This was never about not wanting you to have your wedding here. It was about being treated like I matter." He nodded. "I know. I'm sorry it took something this dramatic for me to understand that." We sat in silence for a while. Then Thomas said, "Can I ask you something?" "Of course. How did you have the courage to do this? To risk making everyone angry? To stand up for yourself even though you knew it would cause a huge mess?" I thought about that question. I thought about 42 years of saying yes when I meant no. 42 years of being invisible, disposable, taken for granted. I didn't have courage, Thomas. I just finally ran out of the ability to stay silent. There's a difference. He smiled sadly. "I think that's the same thing." Maybe it was. 3 months later, Thomas and Rebecca came over on a Sunday afternoon. They called first. They asked if it was a good time. They brought wine and dessert and insisted on doing all the dishes after dinner. It was a small thing, but it meant everything. "Mom," Thomas said as we sat on the porch watching the winter sunset, "Rebecca and I have been talking. We want to pay you rent." "Thomas, you don't have to." "Yes, we do. We've been using this place like it's ours for 5 years. We should have been contributing all along. How does $500 a month sound?" I started to protest, but Rebecca cut me off. "Please, Margaret, let us do this. We want to. We need to. It's not about the money. It's about showing you that we value what you've built here." So I agreed. I also agreed to let them have their wedding at my cottage the following May. But this time, we planned it together. They consulted me on every decision. They asked for my input on flowers, on food, on where to place the chairs. They treated me not like the hired help, but like the host, the owner, the person whose property and opinion mattered. The wedding was beautiful. Smaller than they'd originally planned, only 80 guests instead of 180, but infinitely more meaningful. And this time, when I gave my toast, I didn't talk about how I'd almost canceled their wedding. I talked about how proud I was of Thomas for learning what it means to respect the people you love. Everyone applauded. Thomas cried. And I felt something I'd been chasing for 42 years. Peace. But the story doesn't end there. The property rentals through prestige events became a steady source of income. I made more in the first year than I'd ever made in any year of my working life. I hired a gardener to help maintain the roses. I renovated the cottage's second bathroom. I bought myself things I'd never allowed myself before. Good wine, soft sheets, a comfortable chair for reading. I became friends with Caroline, the event planner. She told me once, over coffee, that she admired what I'd done. "Most people would have caved," she said. "Family guilt is powerful, but you held your ground." "I had to," I said. "If I hadn't, nothing would have changed." They would have kept treating me the same way forever. Do you regret it? The way it happened? I thought about that. About the chaos of that day, the angry phone calls, the canceled wedding, the hurt feelings. No, I said. I don't regret it. I regret that it had to get that extreme before they understood. But the outcome? Number. I don't regret that at all. Word spread in the community about what I'd done. Some people thought I was cold, heartless, a mother who would ruin her own son's wedding just to make a point. But others, especially women my age, sought me out. They wanted to tell me their own stories of being taken for granted, of sacrificing everything for family who never said thank you. I wish I had your courage, one woman told me at the grocery store. It's not too late, I said. It's never too late to stand up for yourself. I hope she believed me. I hope she found her own moment of clarity, her own line in the sand. As for me, I'm 73 now. I've been retired for 5 years. I have a successful small business renting my property for events. I have a son who finally treats me with the respect I deserve. I have a daughter-in-law who's become, surprisingly, a genuine friend. And I have something else, something I didn't have before that October morning when I got the call from the caterer. I have my dignity. I spent 42 years earning the money to buy this property, but I spent 73 years earning the right to be treated like I matter. The property deed came with a price tag. The respect came at a cost too. The cost of being willing to disappoint people, the cost of setting boundaries, the cost of standing firm even when it would have been easier to give in. Some people might say, I'm proud, too proud. That family should forgive, should bend, should prioritize harmony over pride. And maybe they're right. Maybe I am proud, but I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Not after a lifetime of being told in 1,000 small ways that I was less important than everyone else. So yes, I'm proud. Proud of my cottage, proud of my garden. Proud of the fact that I built something from nothing. Proud that I finally learned to use the word no. And I'm proud of my son too, because he learned. He grew. He became the kind of man who can admit when he's wrong and change his behavior. That's not easy. That takes its own kind of courage. Last week, Thomas called me. Mom, Rebecca, and I have been thinking. We want to start a college fund for our future kids. And we were wondering if you'd be willing to be a co-trustee. We trust your judgment. We want you involved in the big decisions. I cried when he said that. Happy tears this time. I'd be honored, I said. That's the thing about respect. Once you have it, really have it, everything else falls into place. The relationship becomes real. The love becomes deeper because it's built on truth instead of obligation. I'm sitting on my porch right now, watching the afternoon light filter through the oak trees. My roses are blooming. The cottage looks beautiful in this light, like something from a painting. In an hour, I have a consultation call with a bride who wants to book the property for next fall. After that, Thomas and Rebecca are coming over for dinner. They're bringing the groceries and cooking. I'm just providing the space and the company. This is my life now, on my terms, in my home, with people who finally understand that I'm not just someone who gives endlessly. I'm someone who deserves to receive, too. Was it worth it? The canceled wedding, the family drama, the temporary rift that could have become permanent? Yes, 1,000 times yes, because I learned something that October morning when I signed the contract with Prestige Events. I learned that you teach people how to treat you, and if you don't teach them, they'll never learn. I'm Margaret Chen. I'm 73 years old. I own 6 acres of beautiful land in Oregon. I run a successful event rental business. I have a son who respects me and a daughter-in-law who's become a friend. And most importantly, I have myself. The version of myself that I always should have been. The version that knows her worth and isn't afraid to defend it. It took me 73 years to get here, but I made it. And if you're reading this, if you're someone who's been taken for granted, who's been treated like the help in your own life, who's been told that setting boundaries makes you selfish or cruel, I want you to know something. It's not too late. It's never too late to stand up for yourself. It's never too late to demand respect. It's never too late to say no. The people who truly love you will learn to respect your boundaries. The people who don't aren't worthy of your sacrifice. I learned that at 73. I hope you learn it sooner. This is Revenge Stories with Michelle, a home for quiet courage and true endings. If you feel my words, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Your voice matters here. Your story matters too. This is my story. This is my victory. This is my life, finally lived on my own terms. And it's the best thing I ever did. 5 years have passed since that October day. 5 years since I stood on my porch and watched my son's wedding guests turn away from my property. 5 years since I learned what it means to truly own something, not just on paper, but in every way that matters. People ask me sometimes if I have any regrets, if there's anything I would do differently if I could go back. And my answer is always the same. I wish I'd done it sooner. I wish I'd set boundaries the first time Thomas and Rebecca showed up unannounced with 10 friends and expected me to cook for them all. I wish I'd said something the first time they left my cottage a mess and drove away without cleaning up. I wish I'd spoken up the first time Rebecca called me by my first name like I was her peer instead of her elder. But I didn't. I stayed silent because that's what I'd been trained to do for 42 years. Stay small, stay quiet, don't make waves, be grateful for what you have, and don't ask for more. That training nearly cost me my dignity. It nearly cost me my relationship with my son. Because resentment builds day by day, slight by slight, until one day you wake up and realize you've become a stranger in your own life. The property rentals changed everything, not just financially, though that was significant. In my first year working with prestige events, I made $60,000. $60,000, more than I'd ever made in a single year as a housekeeper. The second year, I made $85,000. This past year, I cleared over $100,000. I'm wealthy now by my standards. I have savings, I have investments, I have security. But more than that, I have respect. From my son, from my daughter-in-law, from the business community, from the people in town who know my story. And I have respect for myself. That's the part that matters most. Thomas and Rebecca had their rescheduled wedding in May, 8 months after the canceled October date. It was perfect, intimate and beautiful, and exactly what they'd always wanted. But this time built on a foundation of mutual respect instead of assumed entitlement. I walked Thomas down the aisle. Rebecca had suggested it, actually. "Margaret," she'd said, "you're the most important person in Thomas's life. You raised him. You sacrificed for him. You should be the one to give him away." I cried during that walk. Happy tears, healing tears. During the reception, Thomas gave a speech. He talked about love and partnership and building a life together. And then he said something that made the entire crowd fall silent. "I also want to talk about respect," he said, "because I learned something important this year. I learned that you can love someone and still disrespect them. You can care about someone and still take them for granted. And I'm ashamed to say I did both to my mother for a long time." He looked directly at me. Mom stood up for herself in a way that forced me to see what I'd been doing. She could have just kept suffering in silence. She could have let us have our wedding that day and swallowed her hurt feelings like she'd swallowed them 100 times before. But she didn't. She drew a line. She said no. And that no was the greatest gift she could have given me. He raised his glass. "To Margaret Chen, the strongest woman I know. Thank you for teaching me what real love looks like. Love that includes respect." Love that includes boundaries. Love that requires us to actually see each other, not just use each other. I wasn't the only person crying by the end of that speech. Rebecca's mother, Patricia, came up to me later that evening. She's a dignified woman in her 60s, always perfectly dressed, always perfectly controlled. But that night, she had tears in her eyes. "Margaret," she said, "I've been thinking about your story, about what you did, and I realized something. I've been letting my own children treat me the same way. Not quite as extreme, but similar. Taking me for granted, assuming I'll always be available. Never asking, just expecting. It's hard to change that dynamic once it's established," I said. "But you did it. You changed it." "Yes, I did." "How?" "How did you find the strength?" I thought about that question. How had I found the strength? Or had the strength found me when I'd finally run out of the ability to stay small? "I think," I said slowly, "it was when I realized that staying silent was killing me. Not literally, but killing the person I was supposed to be. I'd spent my whole life taking care of other people, and somewhere along the way, I forgot to take care of myself. I forgot that I mattered too." Patricia nodded. "I know that feeling." "It's not too late," I told her. "It's never too late to start mattering to yourself." A few months after the wedding, Patricia called me. "I did it," she said. "I told my kids they couldn't just drop by unannounced anymore. I told them I needed advance notice. I told them I wouldn't be available for babysitting unless they asked me at least a week ahead. And Margaret, they were upset at first. They thought I was being difficult, but then they adjusted. They started respecting my time. They started seeing me as a person with my own life instead of just as mom who's always available." "I'm proud of you," I said, and I meant it. That conversation reminded me of something important. My story wasn't just about me. It was about every woman who's been taught that her worth comes from how much she gives to others. Every mother who's been taken for granted, every grandmother who's expected to provide endless free labor disguised as family love. I started writing my story down, not for publication, just for myself at first. But then I thought, maybe other people need to hear this. Maybe other people are sitting in their gardens, answering phone calls about events on their property that they knew nothing about, feeling that same sick, hollow feeling I felt. So I started a blog. Nothing fancy, just a simple website where I could share my experience. I called it The Cost of Respect, because that's what my story was really about. The cost of finally demanding to be treated with dignity. The response shocked me. Within a month, I had thousands of visitors. Women from all over the world writing to tell me their own stories. Mothers who were treated like housekeepers by their adult children. Grandmothers who were expected to provide free childcare with no consideration for their own time or needs. Women who'd sacrificed their careers, their dreams, their identities to serve their families, only to be treated as if they were invisible. One woman wrote, "I'm 68 years old and I've never once said no to my children. They call at midnight expecting me to answer. They show up unannounced expecting me to feed them. They leave their kids with me for days at a time without asking if I have other plans. And I've never complained because I thought that's what mothers do. But reading your story made me realize I've been slowly erasing myself. Thank you for showing me it's not too late to exist again." Another wrote, "I'm only 35, but I'm already falling into the pattern you described. My mother did it. Her mother did it. Women in my family have been erasing themselves for generations. But I don't want to teach my daughters that their worth comes from how much they sacrifice. I want to teach them what you taught your son, that boundaries are healthy, that respect is necessary, that love and doormat behavior are not the same thing." These messages changed something in me. I'd thought my story was small, personal, just one old woman standing up for herself in her own garden. But it wasn't small. It was part of something much bigger, a cultural pattern of teaching women to give endlessly and never ask for anything in return. I started speaking at women's groups, libraries, community centers, small gatherings where I'd tell my story and then open the floor for discussion. The conversations that emerged were incredible, raw and honest and healing. At one event, a woman in her 50s stood up and said, "I have a question. How do you deal with the guilt? Because I've tried setting boundaries with my adult children, and every time I do, I feel like the worst mother in the world." "The guilt is real," I told her. "It's very real. We've been conditioned our entire lives to believe that being a good mother means being endlessly available, endlessly giving, endlessly self-sacrificing. So when we finally say no, it feels wrong. It feels selfish. It feels cruel. So how do you get past that?" "You don't get past it completely," I said honestly. "At least I haven't. But you learn to recognize it for what it is: conditioning, programming, not truth. The truth is that healthy relationships require boundaries. The truth is that you can't pour from an empty cup. The truth is that teaching your children to respect you is actually one of the most loving things you can do for them." Another woman asked, "What if they don't change? What if you set boundaries and they just get angry and cut you off?" That was the hard question, the one that kept people trapped in dysfunctional patterns out of fear. "Then they've shown you who they are," I said quietly. "And as painful as that is, it's information you need. Because if someone's love for you is conditional on you having no boundaries, on you being endlessly available, on you sacrificing yourself completely, then that's not really love. That's exploitation, with a family label attached." The room went very quiet. "I know that's harsh," I continued. "I know it's terrifying to think about. But in my experience, the people who truly love you will adjust to your boundaries. They might be upset at first. They might push back. They might not understand immediately. But eventually, if they really care about you, they'll learn to respect your limits, and your relationship will become stronger because of it." "And if they don't?" The woman persisted. "Then you have to decide what's more important, their approval or your dignity. And I can tell you from experience, there's only one answer that lets you sleep at night." The speaking engagements led to something unexpected. A local journalist heard about my story and wanted to write an article. I was hesitant at first. Did I really want my family drama plastered in the newspaper? But then I thought about all those women who'd written to me, who'd told me my story gave them courage. The article ran in the Portland Tribune. The grandmother who canceled her son's wedding and found herself. It was balanced and fair, presenting both my perspective and the broader context of family dynamics and generational expectations. The response was overwhelming. Some people thought I was a hero, others thought I was a monster. The comments section became a battleground between people who understood exactly what I'd experienced and people who believed family should tolerate anything, that mothers should sacrifice everything, that setting boundaries was selfish. One comment stayed with me. "This woman is cold and heartless. A real mother would never do this to her child on his wedding day." Another reply underneath said, "A real child would never use his mother's property without permission and then call her dramatic when she objected. Respect goes both ways." That exchange summed up the entire divide. Some people believe parents owe their children everything. Others believe relationships, even parent-child relationships, should be built on mutual respect. I know which side I'm on now. Thomas saw the article. He called me that evening, and I braced myself for anger. But instead, he said, "Mom, I'm proud of you." "You're not upset?" "Why would I be upset?" Everything in that article is true, and honestly, I think it's important for people to hear, especially kids my age who might be taking their parents for granted without even realizing it. Some people think I'm terrible. Some people think the earth is flat. You can't control what other people think, Mom. You can only control whether you're living with integrity, and you are. That conversation meant more to me than anything. The property rental business continued to grow. I hired an assistant, a young woman named Sophie who was brilliant with social media and marketing. She created an Instagram account for the cottage, posting beautiful photos of the gardens, the events, the sunset views. Within 6 months, we had 5,000 followers. Within a year, 10,000. Couples from all over the Pacific Northwest wanted to get married at my cottage. Corporations wanted to host retreats. Photographers wanted to do shoots. My little 6-acre property became one of the most sought-after event venues in the region. I raised my prices, partly because demand justified it, but partly because I'd learned my worth. I was no longer the woman who undervalued herself, who charged too little, who gave too much for too little in return. Sophie once said to me, "Margaret, you're a businesswoman now. You need to think like one. Your property is valuable. Your time is valuable. You are valuable." She was 28 years old and teaching me things I should have learned 50 years ago. But better late than never. With the increased income came increased freedom. I traveled for the first time in my life. Real travel, not just weekend trips. I went to Italy and walked through vineyards. I went to Japan and stayed in a traditional inn. I went to Scotland and hiked through the Highlands. Each trip taught me something new about myself. I was capable. I was resilient. I was interesting. I'd spent so many years being defined by my service to others that I'd forgotten I had my own identity, my own interests, my own right to take up space in the world. On the trip to Italy, I met a man named Giovanni. He was 75, a widower, and he ran a small bed and breakfast in Tuscany. We had dinner one evening, and he asked about my life. I told him the whole story. The 42 years of housekeeping, the cottage, the canceled wedding, everything. He listened quietly, and when I finished, he said something I'll never forget. "You know what the greatest tragedy is? Not that people treat us badly, but that we accept it for so long that we forget we deserve better." "Yes," I said, "that's exactly it. But you remembered. And that's brave." I didn't feel brave. I felt like someone who'd simply run out of the ability to stay small. But maybe that's what bravery is sometimes. Not a grand, heroic gesture, but just the decision to stop shrinking. Giovanni and I stayed in touch. We email regularly. He sends me photos of his gardens. I send him photos of mine. There's nothing romantic between us, but there's friendship. Real friendship built on mutual respect and shared understanding. That's what my life is now. Friendships, meaningful work, travel, independence, all the things I thought were only for other people. Thomas and Rebecca had a baby last year, a little girl named Sophie, after my assistant, which made me cry happy tears. They asked if I wanted to be involved in Sophie's life, and I said yes, but with boundaries. "I'd love to babysit," I told them, "but I need advance notice. At least 3 days, unless it's an emergency. And I'm not available every weekend. I have my own life, my own commitments." They agreed without hesitation. And you know what? Our relationship is better for it. When I do spend time with baby Sophie, I'm genuinely happy to be there, not resentful, not exhausted, not feeling taken advantage of, just happy. Rebecca told me recently, "Margaret, you've taught me so much about how I want to be as a mother and as a mother-in-law someday. I want Sophie to grow up knowing that women have value beyond what they give to others, that setting boundaries is healthy, that respect is non-negotiable." "I'm glad," I said. "That's the best legacy I could hope for." The blog continued to grow. I started hosting online workshops where women could share their stories and strategies for setting boundaries. We created a community, a support system for women learning to value themselves. One participant, a woman named Linda, who was 71, told me, "I'm doing this for my granddaughters. I want them to see their grandmother standing up for herself. I want them to know it's possible. I want them to never feel like they have to erase themselves to be loved." That's what this is really about, breaking generational patterns, teaching the next generation that love and respect go together, that one without the other is incomplete. I'm 78 now, 5 years older than when this all started. My hair is completely white. My hands are more wrinkled. I move a little slower than I used to, but I'm more myself than I've ever been. The cottage is paid off. The business is thriving. Sophie, my assistant, is now my business partner. She's brilliant and kind and treats me as an equal, not as someone to be managed or patronized. Thomas calls me every Sunday, not because he needs something, but because he wants to talk. Rebecca sends me photos of baby Sophie throughout the week. They include me in family decisions, asking my opinion on everything from which preschool to choose to whether they should buy a new car. They treat me like my thoughts matter, because they do. Last month, on the 5-year anniversary of the canceled wedding, Thomas and Rebecca came over for dinner. They brought champagne and a card. Inside the card, Thomas had written, "Thank you for loving me enough to teach me respect. Thank you for being brave enough to set boundaries. Thank you for showing me what a strong woman looks like. I'm sorry it took me so long to see you clearly, but I see you now, and I'm grateful every day for who you are." I cried reading that. Full, grateful, healing tears. "I'm proud of you," I told him. "You've grown into an incredible man, an incredible father, and that makes everything worth it. We toasted to family, to respect, to second chances, to the fact that it's never too late to change, to grow, to become better versions of ourselves. The property looks different now, more polished, more professional. Sophie installed better lighting for evening events. We built a small parking area. We added an accessible pathway so people with mobility issues could enjoy the gardens. But it's still mine, still the place I worked 42 years to buy, still the land where I finally learned to stand up for myself. Sometimes when I'm alone in the garden, I think about the woman I was 5 years ago, the woman who said yes to everything, who swallowed her feelings, who believed her worth came from how much she gave to others. I feel compassion for that woman. She was doing the best she could with the tools she had, but I'm glad I'm not her anymore. I'm Margaret Chen. I'm 78 years old. I own a successful event business. I have a son who respects me. I have a granddaughter who will grow up seeing that her grandmother demanded dignity and got it. I have friendships built on equality, not obligation. I have money in the bank. I have plans for the future. And I have myself. That's the most important part. After 73 years of living for others, I finally learned to live for myself, too. Not instead of others, but alongside them, in balance, with boundaries, with respect. The canceled wedding wasn't the end of my relationship with my son. It was the beginning of a real relationship, one built on honesty instead of assumed obligation, one where we both matter, one where love includes respect, not as an extra feature, but as the foundation. People still ask me if I regret what I did, if I wish I'd handled it differently, if I think I went too far. My answer is always the same. I don't regret standing up for myself. I regret that I waited so long to do it. I regret all those years of silence. I regret teaching my son, through my own behavior, that it was okay to take me for granted. But the canceled wedding, the contract with prestige events, the $8,000 I earned while my son's wedding guests were turned away? Number. I don't regret that at all, because that was the day I stopped being invisible. That was the day I became real, not just to my family, but to myself, and that was worth everything. This is Revenge Stories with Michelle, a home for quiet courage and true endings. If you feel my words, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Your voice matters here. Your story matters too. I'm sitting on my porch now, the same porch where I stood 5 years ago and watched my son's wedding guests turn away. The oak trees are taller. The roses are more abundant. The cottage has aged gracefully, and so have I. In an hour, I have an event consultation. A young couple who wants to get married here next fall. After that, I'm having dinner with Sophie and her fiancé. Tomorrow, Thomas and Rebecca are bringing baby Sophie over for the afternoon, and I'm going to teach her to plant seeds in the garden. Not because I have to, not because they expect it, but because I want to. That's the difference now. Everything I do is a choice, not an obligation, not a requirement, not something I do out of guilt or fear of disappointing people, a choice. And in choosing, I found freedom. This is my story. This is my truth. This is my life, finally lived on my own terms. It took me 73 years to get here, but I made it. And if you're reading this, if you're someone who's been invisible in your own life, someone who's been taken for granted, someone who's been taught that your worth comes from how much you give and never from what you deserve to receive, I want you to know something. It's not too late. It's never too late to matter. It's never too late to demand respect. It's never too late to set boundaries. It's never too late to become visible in your own life. The people who truly love you will adjust. The people who don't aren't worthy of your continued sacrifice. I learned that at 73. I hope you learn it sooner. But whenever you learn it, whenever you finally stand up for yourself, know that you're not alone. There are thousands of us, women who finally said enough, women who finally demanded dignity, women who finally learned that we matter too. Welcome to the garden of broken promises, the promises we made to always be available, always be giving, always be selfless. Those promises are broken now, and in their place, we've planted something new: self-respect, boundaries, dignity, worth. And these seeds grow into the most beautiful gardens of all. This is Margaret Chen, signing off. Thank you for listening to my story. May it give you courage to write your own.